Hi, it's Steph, and I'm at Lowe's, and they have a bunch of new perennials, shrubs, and things have even started to hit the clearance rack. So let's go ahead and take a look at the June inventory at Lowe's. Check out this beautiful and bright bee balm. Now, bee balm is also known as Monarda, and it has a really nice fragrance. It's part of the mint family, so it's pretty deer and rabbit resistant. And this one here is the Leading Lady Raspberry. It has a really beautiful pink color. It likes full sun, part sun. Let's see how large it gets. I'm on the hunt for a taller bee balm. Most of them stay somewhere around 18 to 24 inches. And this Leading Lady is also a short variety. It looks like it gets 10 to 14 inches in height and needs 22-inch spacing. And it is hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It tells you pairings, so that is a great thing that these tags from Proven Winners has. So these would look great with coral bells, Shasta daisy, speedwell, Lugularia, daylily, and so forth. So these are great. The only thing you should know about growing bee balm is that you should give them proper spacing because they are prone to powdery mildew, which is, it will just look like a powdery kind of look on your leaves. But they are a great pollinator attracting plant. Bee balm or Monarda is a perennial, and this container here is a 1 gallon for $15.98. And look how beautiful these two colors look together, this hot pink with this golden yellow. And this is Coreopsis. Now this is a workhorse perennial. It has tons of buds and it just blooms and blooms all season long. This variety is called the Jethro Tull Coreopsis. It is a full sun perennial. These are the larger 2 gallon containers for $15.98, and it is hardy to a zone 5 or negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And this variety gets 15 to 18 inches in height and 18 to 24 inches in width. I have a light yellow variety called Moonbeam, and I absolutely love it. It blooms for a really long time. So right now in mid-spring all the way through fall, it will bloom for me. So these are a really great perennial. Now here's one that has a beautiful bloom, but I don't particularly like in my garden for 2 reasons. One, I find that they self-seed themselves everywhere. So if you like that, then it wouldn't be a problem for you. But also because I find that once they get a little bit taller, they, for me, are a really floppy plant that requires a little bit of staking. Now there are some shorter varieties, and this one here does look like it could be a shorter variety of bellflower. But let's go ahead and take a look at the specs on this one. So this is the Tachyon Blue Bellflower. It's a variety of Campanella, which Campanella in general here in my zone 6 can be a little bit of a problematic plant with the self-seeding and spreading itself around. It blooms in spring. It says it's an upright perennial. These are their 2 gallon containers for $15.98, and they are hardy down to a zone 3 or negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And they get to be 16 to 20 inches in height. So they can put on a little bit of height and 12 to 18 inches in width. Now, in general, when perennials start to split in the middle, sort of like your Russian sages and your salvias, it is usually because they're either getting too much water or not enough sunlight. But that was not the case with my bellflower. They were getting enough of both. So I'm not sure what the problem was, but they do have a really pretty bloom. They're very similar to the balloon flower, which is another one I've had in my garden as well. And another really pretty pairing for the garden is some daylilies with some salvia. The contrast of that bloom with the tall spike of the salvia just looks really beautiful. Now, daylilies, they are just that. They bloom for 1 day, but there are tons of buds, so you will get multiple blooms off of the plant. And even when they're not in bloom, you have a clump of foliage. I do find that the foliage will go a little bit brown after they're done blooming, but you can cut them back and they'll flush out with new growth. And so it'll look like you have an ornamental grass when they're not in bloom. The deer do like them, so you should spray your buds to keep them from eating them. Daylilies are like deer candy. But these two, if you're starting a new perennial border, they're really easy to take care of and they look really great together. Also, Nepeta is another great spike type bloom that complements the daylily very well. This variety of salvia is the Midnight Model Salvia. This is in their larger container for $15.98. It is a full sun perennial. Salvia likes a well-draining soil and full sun. The pollinators are on it constantly, and I do have a video on my channel on how to keep your salvia blooming for most of the season with proper deadheading, and that just means shearing the plant back once most of their blooms have gone over. You can see there are bees all over this, and it's also very hardy. down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit or a zone 3. And this variety gets to be 18 to 24 inches tall and wide. That is the size for most of the salvias. There are a couple of varieties that are a little bit shorter. And the other great thing is that they are deer and rabbit resistant. Because they have a fragrance, they usually stay away from them. And here's another really impactful plant in the garden, penstemon, also known as beer tongue, and it's really tall. This particular variety happens to have a darker foliage, another pollinator attracting plant, and they have these little bell-shaped or trumpet-shaped blooms that are really dainty and pretty. The other thing about this plant that's great is if you like to work with cut flowers or make arrangements throughout the growing season, even once the blooms go over, it gets these really pretty seed pods that make really pretty fillers in floral arrangements. Now this variety here is the Dark Towers penstemon. It's in a Lowe's house container. This 1.5 gallon is $15.98. It's an upright perennial for full sun, and it is hardy down to zone 3 or negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets to be 24 to 36 inches in height and 18 to 24 inch spacing. Now I have a pretty tall variety. It's the Midnight Masquerade by Proven Winners in my garden, and it is just about to burst into bloom, and it looks absolutely beautiful. Here's another really great perennial. It is geranium, and this variety is by Proven Winners, and it is called the Boom Chocolata. And what's cool about this one is that it has dark foliage, as you can see here. So even when it's not in bloom, the foliage provides lots of interest in the garden. Now this one here is, let's see how big it gets. It is a perennial, and it's a 1 gallon for $15.98. They like full sun or part sun. And it gets 24 to 26 inches in height and needs 28 inch spacing. And it is hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It says that it blooms early to late summer, and it likes full to part sun. And I have a variety of geranium that is very similar to this one in my garden, and I absolutely love it. It has a really pretty kind of violet type purple, just gorgeous. And look how pretty it pairs with the Monarda here, or the bee balm. That hot pink with this light purple, such a great grouping. And here's another really nice fragrant perennial that the pollinators also love, and it's agastache. It can also be called agastachy. And this variety here is the Proven Winners Mint to Be Royal Raspberry. Now, I will tell you that I have tried growing agastache before, and even though it's listed as a perennial, it has not returned for me in my garden. And I think part of the reason for that is because I planted it in a damp soil in a bed that I have that stays pretty moist. And these like a very soil that runs kind of dry and well draining, and that they get full sun. So this variety here is a medium height plant at 28 to 32 inches in height. It needs 28 inch spacing, and it is hardy in zones 5 through 9 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms midsummer through early fall. Now this is another one that has a really nice fragrance, and you can see it's all budded up and getting ready to bloom. The pollinators absolutely love this, especially the hummingbirds, because of the tubular shaped bloom. They can really get their beak in there. Foliage almost smells minty to me. Really nice plant. And Russian sage. Now, when it comes to Russian sage, there are some really tall varieties, but this particular one by Proven Winners is the Denim and Lace, and it's a more compact variety. So it stays a little bit shorter, which means it would also be less likely to need staking and flop in the center. So that is a good thing. And this one here, the Denim and Lace, this is a 1 gallon container for $12.98. It was listed as a perennial of the year at some point. And let's see the size requirements on this one. So it is a medium height at 28 to 32 inches in height and needs 34 inch spacing, hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It blooms midsummer through fall. Russian sage also has a really nice, pleasant fragrance. It gets these really light purple, beautiful spike blooms. Pairs so well with so many different varieties of plants. It's just a really great one. So again, well-draining soil that leans dry in full sun to prevent any flopping on Russian sage. And check out this dicentra. Now this one is different than the one we see in earlier spring, which has a more broad leaf. This one has almost like a ferny leaf, and the blooms are more upright instead of arching like the regular dicentra or bleeding hearts. The Proven Winners Pink Diamonds dicentra. It is a perennial for full sun. These are 2.5 quart for $12.98. And let's check out the specs on this one. And I'll give you a little bit of a close-up on the blooms. So this is a short perennial at 12 to 16 inches in height, needs 16-inch spacing, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 9, and it blooms late spring through early fall. So if you wanted to, and it can do full sun and part sun, which I'm finding on a lot of perennials, which is actually a really great option. So if you wanted to extend the amount of time that you have bleeding hearts in your garden, you can have the traditional broadleaf variety with the arching branches earlier in the spring, and then this variety would kick in for your later spring show. You can see here the blooms. These are kind of on their way out here now, but very similar. They're just a little more narrow, and the branching for the blooms is a little more upright. And my Lowe's also has the Cat's Meow. Now, I've seen the Cat's Pajamas before, which happens to be the variety that I have in my garden, but this is the first time I'm seeing the Cat's Meow. The Cat's Pajamas is a little bit shorter, more compact nepeta, and it's great for the front of the border. And this Cat's Meow is just a little bit broader and a little bit taller. So this 2.5 quart container is $12.98. They like full sun, and this one here gets to be 17 to 20 inches in height and needs 24-inch spacing, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 8, so very hardy, down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I can't tell you how much I love nepeta. Has a really nice fragrance. It's part of the mint family. Deer and rabbit don't touch it. It's a prolific bloomer from mid-spring all the way through fall. The first flush is usually the biggest, and then if you deadhead it by shearing back the plant once it's done blooming, it will keep sending up more blooms throughout the season, and the pollinators are always all over it. So a really great plant for the garden. I would definitely say that this is one of those perennials that are a staple in the garden. Some Asiatic lilies. Now these are great to add a lot of color to the garden. Look at these. If you have a hot colored garden with oranges and yellows and reds, these are a really pretty variety here. This is a Monrovia, and it is called the Tiny Lion Asiatic Lily. It is a perennial for full sun. These are $10.98. I do find that I do have to protect my lily buds from the deer because they will eat them. Now they come in all different heights. There are the stargazers, they get pretty tall, the oriental lilies, and then these Asiatic ones tend to be a little bit shorter. Now this particular variety gets to be 12 to 18 inches in height and 8 inches in width, blooms in summer, and it is hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it does like sun. And speaking of hot colored garden combinations, look how beautiful this yarrow or achillea looks with these lilies. So pretty. This is an achillea or yarrow by Monrovia, and it is called Millie Rock Yellow Achillea. They like full sun, well-draining soil with not too much moisture. I actually have to purchase some new yarrow or achillea this year because mine that was planted in a bed that stays relatively moist has not come back all that well. I only have a couple of sprigs of it, so it's died back significantly. But wow, look how beautiful this looks even with this speedwell behind it. You see that? Gorgeous. That yellow color with a little bit of terracotta and that violet purple. What a stunning combination. This Millie Rock Achillea or yarrow is $10.98 for this 1 gallon container. It is a perennial and they are easy care. They are drought and heat tolerant when established. They're early to flower and ignored by deer and rabbits. They want 6+ hours of sun per day, and they get to be 10 to 12 inches in height and 10 to 12 inches in width. Hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And that speedwell or Veronica that we just looked at is called the Dark Blue Moody Blues Speedwell by Monrovia. It is a perennial. It's $10.98 for this container. It likes full sun. It is deer resistant, and it gets to be 12 to 14 inches in height and 12 to 14 inches in width. Hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms spring, summer, and fall. And when you see that on a perennial, that it blooms spring, summer, and fall, that usually means with regular deadheading, you will continue to get blooms out of that plant. And deadheading just means once the bloom is done, like you see here, you would follow that down, snip it off, and then clean up your plant. And that is deadheading, which will keep your plant producing more blooms instead of going to set seed. And here is one more beautiful variety of yarrow or achillea. This is a pink variety called Millie Rock Rose Yarrow. Look how pretty that is. And the other interesting thing about this plant is that it will start off one color and then age to another. So it might start a darker pink like this, and then it will fade to a lighter pink before going almost a pale white color. Just really pretty. So a lot of color variation from just one plant. See that? And with those purples, I just love pink and purple in the garden. Pink, purple, white, a little bit of yellow. Those are usually my color schemes. I'm just adding yellow now. I wasn't a fan of yellow in the past, but now I have a whole new appreciation for it. So this Millie Rock Rose Yarrow likes full sun. It is a perennial. These are $10.98, easy care. And same as the other, they'll be deer and rabbit resistant and drought tolerant once established. And it gets 10 to 12 inches in height and width, hardy down to a negative 10 degree Fahrenheit. And some garden phlox, another quintessential perennial for the garden, especially if you have a mixed perennial border or even a cottage garden. You do want to give proper spacing to phlox because they are prone to something called powdery mildew, which will look like you have a powdery substance on your foliage if they don't get proper airflow. This one is called Garden Girl's Baby Doll Pink Phlox, and it is an upright perennial. It blooms in summer. $8.98 for these in the Lowe's house container. And let's see how large this one gets. Pretty tall, I can tell that. It looks like it gets, well, it says 12 to 16 inches in height, but I have some, well, phloxes will come in all different heights. So I have some that are taller and some that are shorter. It is deer resistant, although I do find that sometimes the deer will take bites out of mine. So I think it really just depends on the deer in your garden. And it is hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit or a zone 4. Here is a perennial that many people enjoy, but it is pretty invasive, at least in my experience. This is the primrose, the showy pink primrose. It has a tendency to seed itself around. So if you're okay with that, it is a really pretty light pink perennial. Very billowy and soft looking. Almost looks like tissue paper flowers. And they like full sun. They bloom in summer and in fall. And they look like they have a pretty short stature here. Let's see. They 12 inches in height, 12 inches in width, hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit or a zone 4. And some buddleia or butterfly bushes. Now, these remind me very much of lilacs because of the shape of their blooms as well as some of their fragrances. I had the Pugster by Proven Winners, which is a dwarf buddleia, and that one very much smelled like lilac to me. Now these, some people love them and some people don't. They're not really considered native, and so some of them, the older varieties, can be problematic because they get quite large and drop seed and self-seed themselves around. But no one can deny that they really do bring in the pollinators, especially the butterflies. Hence the name butterfly bush. So let's check out the varieties that they have here in stock. I see two varieties here in the Lowe's house brand containers. There's this one here called Nanho Purple Butterfly Bush. And this one also, they all like full sun and a well-draining soil. I actually lost my buddleias because they were in that particular bed that I keep mentioning that stays pretty moist, and the moisture did them in after a couple of years. So a well-draining soil that is in full sun. So this particular variety here gets to be 6 to 8 feet in height and 4 to 5 feet in width, and it is hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit or a zone 5. It does read as deer resistant, and that's possible because of their fragrance. So I will show you the color bloom on this one. It looks like this. Very pretty. And then they also have this variety, which is a deeper purple, kind of fuchsia color. And this one is called the Royal Red Butterfly Bush. And let's see the size. It also likes full sun. These are $22.98. They look to be about a 2-gallon container. And it gets to be 8 feet in height, 6 feet in width, hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit or a zone 5. They also have some dwarf butterfly bushes here, and these are by, I don't know what brand. They look like they could be maybe a Lowe's house brand container, or maybe it's called Butterfly Candy. Little Raspberry Buddleia. These are $24.98. They're a 2-gallon container, and these get to be 2 to 3 feet tall and wide, which is about how big the Pugster by Proven Winners gets. Now these don't have any blooms to see the color. They're all kind of spent. But the other thing I found about butterfly bushes is if you go in and you clean them up by deadheading and taking off these spent blooms, you will continue to get more blooms all the way through your first hard frost in the fall. So they really do bloom for a very long time. They are kind of late to leaf out in the season, usually by late spring, and then they will just keep going until your frost. And one of my very favorite perennials for blooms in the late summer garden is the hardy hibiscus. Now this is one that can take a little bit of moisture in the soil because they're like swamp mallow. So they like soil that stays a little bit moist but well draining. So they don't want to be sitting and sopping wet soil, but something that stays consistently moist, they will be really happy. They get these really large tropical looking blooms. They are really stunning. When they're in bloom, they're so eye-catching. This one here happens to be the proven winner, Summerific Berry Awesome. It says that it was a perennial of the year. They like full sun, part sun. This is $17.98 for a 2-gallon. And they get to be 48 inches tall, and they need 54-inch spacing. They do get quite large, and it usually happens somewhere around year 3. They will be full size. And this one here says that it is hardy in zones 4 through 9, and they bloom midsummer through early fall. Now, something else to note about these is that they are really late to break dormancy. So if you plant one this year and next spring you start looking around and you don't see any signs of life, you might think that they didn't make it. But these are one of the last things in my garden to break dormancy, usually somewhere in mid to late May. So don't worry if you plant one, just know that they are late to come back the following season. But they get these really beautiful large leaves and huge dinner plate size blooms. And some shade perennials. They have some hosta. Now this is a proven winners variety called Shadowland Hudson Bay. They like part shade. Now the only thing with hosta is that you do have to be careful to protect them from deer because they are like deer salad. But look how beautiful these are. They add a lot of color in a shady spot with just foliage. Now this particular one here gets to be, it needs 24-inch spacing. So I would say it's a small to medium size hosta. Some of them can get quite large, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 9 and blooms early summer. Now hosta do send up bloom stalks, and this is what they look like. They will open up to these little trumpet shaped flowers that the pollinators absolutely love. Now some people like the blooms on hostas and some don't. And if you don't, all you have to do is follow the stem down and just cut it off. And look how pretty this one is. It has a really gorgeous kind of limey chartreuse color. So pretty. I think the lighting is a little difficult, but look at that. That is gorgeous. This is the Shadowland Echo the Sun. These are $12.98 for 2.5 quart containers. Hosta are perennial. Let's see how large this one gets. 19 inches, and it needs 19-inch height, and it needs 42-inch spacing. So I would say that's a medium-sized hosta, and they do get pretty large over time, so you want to space them appropriately. They are hardy in zones 3 through 9 or down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and they bloom midsummer. This is a really pretty one. Here's another plant that looks pretty tropical, and it's Gloxina, I believe is the name of it. Let's see. Yeah, hardy Gloxina. I've grown this one before. It also did not return for me in my garden, but I could have grown it in the wrong spot. It was earlier on when I was new to gardening several years ago. This one here is a 2.5 quart container in the Lowe's brand pots here for $8.98. It likes part sun, and let's see how large it gets. You can see it has like a ferny type foliage, really pretty foliage. Hardy down to zone 5 or negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 18 to 24 inches in height and needs 12-inch spacing. The blooms almost look like a petunia to me, or a diplodenia or mandevilla. See that? I'm guessing that pollinators also love it because of the shape of the bloom. They can get their beak in there. Spirea is also another favorite shrub of mine in the garden. I have the variety by Proven Winners called the Candy Corn Spirea, and it has a really beautiful yellow coloring. But this one also has a really pretty green that almost looks like a chartreuse. And right now they are getting ready to bloom. So most of them are a mid-spring through summer bloomer. The pollinators absolutely love them, and these are just really great shrubs. I don't find that they have many pests or disease. The deer and rabbit don't touch mine. Because mine is a little bit lighter, I do find that sometimes it'll get a little leaf scorch, and that can happen until a plant is acclimated to its growing spot. I've had mine there for about 2 or 3 seasons now, and it's starting to get a bit better. This one here is by First Editions. It's called the Little Spark Spirea, and it is a compact spirea, and the size on this one is only 18 to 24 inches in height and 18 to 30 inches in width. So really great size to tuck into most gardens. It likes full sun to part shade, and it gets a reddish pink, I would say bloom. The foliage definitely looks on the green side. Medium water needs and hardy in zones 3 through 8, and it is deer resistant. Very pretty shrub to add to a mixed shrub border with all of your perennials. And this one here is a 2-gallon for $27.98. And here is another spirea that is loaded with blooms at the moment. Look at that. And these are getting ready to open. And this variety is, let's see, the Double Play Big Bang by Proven Winners. And there's a picture of what it looks like when it's all in bloom. It wants 6+ hours of sun, or 4 to 6 hours. So it can do full sun or part sun. Hardy in zones 3 through 8 or down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. And it gets to be 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. The Double Play Big Bang. And these are their 1-gallon container for $16.98. And what I really love about these 1-gallon containers is that not only are they easier to plant, but they're also a more affordable price point. So especially if you want to plant a couple of them, it makes it easier to be able to buy them. And these will grow very quickly. Now, while it is late spring and almost summer, we are, into the flowers right now, but don't forget about your winter garden. So this would be a great time to add some evergreen interest, because when all of your perennials are dormant and no longer blooming, you still want something pretty to provide structure and to give you something to look at in the winter garden. And this is a great one. Now, this is a cypress, a gold mop false cypress. This one is called Golden Charm Thread Branch Cypress by Monrovia. Usually they have them in the Lowe's house brand container, and I'll look around a little bit more. For us here in the Northeast, Monrovia plants tend to be a little bit higher price point, and I believe that's part of the supply chain because it's coming from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. So this particular one here is $89. But they are great quality plants. They're just a bit of a higher price point. So this one here gets to be 8 feet wide by 6 feet tall, so also pretty good size. And it is hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is hardy in zones 4 through 8. Really beautiful golden color. With these, you do want to make sure that they get plenty of sun. If not, they will end up being a bit more green versus this gorgeous golden color. And here we go. I just found some in the Lowe's brand house container. And look at that. This is the Lemon Thread Branch Cypress. And it is essentially the same plant. And these here are $32.98. And these are 2.33 gallons. The Lemon Thread False Cypress. And look how beautiful that shape is on this evergreen. Gorgeous. So these I find are also really deer resistant in my garden. They do not touch them. They get to be 3 to 5 feet in height, 2 to 4 feet in width. They're hardy down to zone 4, so very hardy, down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. And I actually made a video on my channel. I had one of these planted in my front border, and it got a little bit big for its space, so I actually pruned it into a small topiary tree. So if you want to check that out, I will link the video in the description as well as in the pinned comment. But these are a really great evergreen. And here is a spirea with dark foliage. Look how pretty this is. So it looks like it is a darker green, but all of the new foliage has this dark kind of burgundy color. And the blooms are a deeper fuchsia, almost red. Look at that. So pretty. And this is the Double Play Doozy by Proven Winners. Let's see how big this one gets. This spirea is hardy in zones 3 through 8 or down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. And it likes sun and part shade. That is gorgeous. Look at that. So pretty. These are, let's see, it looks like a 2-gallon for $27.98. That is a stunner. And another dark foliage shrub that I love in my garden is Weigela. I have the Wine and Roses Weigela, which is a pretty good size. I would say that mine is somewhere about 4 to 5 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide at the moment. This one is called Very Fine Wine. Same color scheme, the dark foliage with the pink trumpet-shaped blooms. Mine happens to be in full bloom right now in my zone 6, now in mid-June. And this particular shrub likes full sun or part sun. I have mine in full sun, and it is hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 2 to 2.5 feet tall and wide, so nice and compact. The Very Fine Wine Weigela. And these are 2-gallon containers for $27.98. Really beautiful foliage. So this is something to add a lot of contrast in the garden with all of the green having this dark foliage. So even when they're not in bloom, they provide a lot of visual interest. And I could not pass up this beauty. This is a 9-bark. Look at this foliage. This reminds me very much of the Proven Winners Ginger Wine 9-bark, but this is by First Editions, and it is their Fireside 9-bark. Just look at that. So gorgeous. I absolutely love these. My tiny wine 9 bark is currently in full bloom, and what happens with these as they age is most of them will take on kind of a arching kind of habit with all of the weight of their blooms. They cascade. It looks absolutely stunning. So this one here, let's see, it is a full sun shrub. The foliage is deep red to purple. It has medium water needs and hardy in zones 3 through 7. And it gets to be 5 to 7 feet in height and 4 to 6 feet in width. And it is drought tolerant once established. And these shrubs will bloom in spring. So a really pretty 9 bark here. And this container by First Editions is, let's see how much these are. These are a 2-gallon for $27.98. And potentilla. Now this is something that I just became aware of last year. And while it looks like a perennial because it feels pretty soft, it doesn't have the feel of a shrub, right? Because the stems are nice and pliable. It is a shrub, and it's really pretty. It's got different color blooms. I've seen them in yellow, in pink, and in white. They're really dainty bloom, just very pretty. And you can see here, they almost look like they could take on the appearance of like a shrub or drift rose, right? So this one is called Creme Brulee Potentilla, and it is by First Editions. It is a full sun shrub. It has medium green foliage, low to medium water needs, hardy in zones 2 through 6, so pretty hardy range there, down to a 2. And it gets to be 3 to 3.5 feet in height and 2 to 3 feet in width. And it is deer resistant and drought tolerant. And these are, let's see, I'm guessing $27.98 seems to be the price. Yes, for a 2-gallon. But just a really pretty shrub. You can see this one has white, and this one right beside it has some yellow blooms. And the yellow one is called, let's see, Marmalade Potentilla. Oh, so nice when the sun goes away. We can see things better and it feels cooler. Okay, roses and I don't get along all that well. I actually have some in pots right now in a rose ICU trying to nurse them back to health, but this is gorgeous. Look at this. All of these petals, it almost looks like a peony. This is Sweet Mademoiselle by Bloomables. Let's look at the specs on this one. It is a hybrid tea rose. It is very fragrant, and I could vouch for that because I just smelt it, and it is amazing. It grows in full sun, and they also like a well-draining soil, I find, roses. They usually do well with about 1 inch of rainfall or 1 inch of water per week. And it says to water regularly until established. This one gets to be 5 feet in height, so pretty tall. It's got a peachy pink color and sweet fruit smell. So beautiful. And this one here is a 2-gallon for $28.98. Here is a rose that does do well for me, and it is the Knockout Rose. I have a few of them planted in my main front walkway, and it's this variety here, the double pink Knockout, and it does really well. Easy care, minimal disease or pests to contend with. The thing that I deal with the most on these is sore-tooth larva. At this point in the season when their first flush comes out, it just makes the leaves look unsightly, but it doesn't affect the blooms. In fact, it is loaded with blooms at the moment. And then the leaves will kind of, you can take them off and then they'll flush out with new leaves, and you will never even know it happened. These here are a 2-gallon for $25.98. So if you want a really easy, low maintenance rose, the Knockout Rose, I would say is a great option for a landscape shrub rose. Oh, here's another one of that Sweet Mademoiselle. It's tempting me, but so many great varieties of roses. And roses just need to be regularly deadheaded. So you just cut off the spent blooms and it'll keep producing more blooms. But in general, June is the month for roses. You'll get the most prolific blooms in June, and then you'll get sporadic reblooming throughout the season. All right, let's see what we can find on the clearance rack. So here is the clearance price structure here at my store. It used to be that everything was just 50% off, but now it seems that only the things that are $15 and up are 50% off, and everything else is just kind of marked down a bit. If you are still looking for some annuals, they have some Supertunia Vista Bubblegum, which is a really popular variety of Supertunia here at my store, marked down. Now, these are $5.98, so they would be $4. Some of them are still in pretty decent shape, and all you would have to do with petunias to clean them up is to just give them a good haircut, a little bit of fertilizer, and they should perk up in no time. Because petunias have a tendency to get a little bit leggy like that. So usually that just means that it needs a trim. And yes, you will be sacrificing blooms for a couple of weeks, but then it'll thank you for it with lots more blooms. Now, when you're shopping for plants on the clearance rack, you just want to make sure that they're in okay health, that there are still some signs of life. Like these here still have some buds on them, and if they got watered today, they would probably still be okay to take home, but these feel pretty dry, so that is something you want to pay attention to. If they still are getting watered and cared for, then it might be worth the risk, but that is something that you're going to have to assess for yourself. But this is a daisy, and here you can see that this one is the Sweet Daisy Birdie by Monrovia. It is a full sun perennial. These are $10.98, which means they would be $7. And they get to be 18 to 24 inches in height and 18 to 24 inches in width. Here's another really cool plant that hit the clearance rack. I actually really like this one, and I have it growing in my garden at the moment. I purchased it here last year, and it is in bloom right now in my garden. It is the Chantilly Lace Aruncus by Proven Winners. It is a more dwarf style aruncus. Usually these can get pretty large, but this one stays pretty compact. It can do sun or shade, and it's just over the $15 mark, so it would be 50% off. So that is a great price for this one. This is a 1 gallon container, so it would be $8 about for this. Now, when I was looking at these here, this is how I would pick the one that I want to take home. You can see this one still nice and green. Stuck my finger in the soil. There's a little bit of moisture there. These are not looking so hot. Okay, so I would pass those up, and I'd go for something that looks like this or like this. Make sure that there's some moisture, there's still signs of life, and then when you get home, you would just cut off all of these spent blooms, keep it in a shady spot and water it for a few days, and maybe even give it a little bit of an organic fertilizer, like a fish emulsion, to give it a little boost. Plant it as soon as you can, keep it watered, and it will return for you beautifully next season. Now, the size on this one, I said that it is a little bit more compact than the traditional aruncus. This one gets to be 30 to 32 inches in height and 40 inches in width. And the regular aruncus gets much larger, the goat's beard. It blooms in early summer through midsummer, and it can do sun to shade. And it is hardy in zones 3 through 7 or down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Another great find for a perennial on the clearance rack. This is the Proven Winners Color Spires Pink Dawn. So this is a pink salvia. It is perennial. This one here is $12.98, so it would be $7 marked down. These have a little bit of moisture if you go down into the soil, and you can see there's still lots of green foliage and even some new buds. So this would be relatively safe to buy, I would say. In my opinion, I would feel okay about taking these home. So that's what you want to do when you're looking at the clearance rack. Assess for moisture, signs of health, some new bloom buds, and save yourself some money by buying some clearance plants to plant in your garden, especially perennials and shrubs. Really good buys. And some ladies mantle. So this is in the Lowe's house container for $8.98. So these would be $4. And I absolutely love ladies mantle this year. Mine in my garden is in full bloom at the moment. And this is what the blooms look like. They have these sprays of these really dainty flowers that almost look like baby's breath in this chartreuse kind of green limey color. Really pretty. And the way that these leaves catch water is really interesting and gives you something to look at. I really love it. So this one here is the Ladies Mantle Thriller variety. They do like shade. They can handle part sun. So a morning sun would be a little gentler. And these here bloom in spring and summer. And even when they're not in bloom, they provide a lot of interest with the texture of the leaves. They're hardy to a zone 4 or negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And they get to be 8 inches in height and 10 inches in width. And these here, you can see that some of them look pretty sad and need a lot of water. And these two here are actually in relatively good shape. So that's how you go about picking your clearance plants. There is definitely a lot of great plants to be saved. And if you want to add a forsythia for next spring, now is the time to buy them. Look at this one. The Proven Winners Show Off Forsythia is 50% off. So instead of $29, it would be $14.50. And this one here is a sun or part sun shrub. It is hardy in zones 5 through 8 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And it gets to be 5 to 6 feet tall and wide. Some of the Monrovia Dwarf Deutzia. This is a full or part sun shrub. It says it is compact, so it gets to be, let's see, average size of 2 feet tall and 5 feet wide. And this one here is $44.98, so it would be about $22.50. And it still looks in relatively good shape. Lots of green growth. So the important thing is to take it home and water it right away and keep it in a shady spot. And this is one that I did buy on clearance last year, well, maybe the year before last, and it is doing beautifully in my garden. It is a willow. This is the Iceberg Alley Sage Leaf Willow by First Editions. And willows in general like water. So I have this in a spot that stays pretty moist, and it is really happy. It will get these little blooms that are called catkins in spring. And then you have this really beautiful foliage that looks like sage in this blue-gray coloring. And this one is a 2-gallon container for $27.98, so it'd be about $14. That's what the blooms look like, those catkins there. And that is the shape of the shrub. So really pretty color contrast and even texture. It likes full sun. It has silver foliage, medium to high water needs, gets to be 3 to 6 feet tall and wide, and hardy in zones 2 through 6. There's even a couple of buddleias on clearance here. So this is a first edition's buddleia or butterfly bush. You can see it still has lots of green foliage and new growth. And this is, let's see what size. It's the psychedelic sky butterfly bush. Looks like it has a purple bloom, and it gets to be 4 to 6 feet in height and 4 to 5 feet in width. It likes full sun and hardy in zones 5 through 9. And these are, let's see how much. $18.98, which would make them 50% off at about $9.50. We actually just saw some of this Millie Rock Yellow Achillea or yarrow on the regular priced rack there for $10.98. These have hit the clearance rack, and all they need is a little bit of water, and you can get them for $7. And here's another really beautiful spring blooming shrub. It is a viburnum, and this one is called the popcorn viburnum. It gets these really beautiful round, almost softball sized shaped white blooms. Now they look very much like a hydrangea, except that these will bloom in spring and they're a viburnum, and the hydrangeas will bloom in summer, a little bit later. And so these are really pretty. They have these serrated leaves, but even on clearance, I feel like the price is a little bit high for me. At $79, would make it about $40, but this is a really beautiful variety of viburnum, and it likes partial to full sun. It blooms in spring, and it is hardy in zones 5 through 9 and hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And it gets to be 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. I don't know. This is another one that I'm a little bit tempted at. $40. I don't know. What would you do? Let me know in the comments. And look at this, some double play red spirea on the clearance rack. And these, look at this. They still have lots of green growth on them. They feel relatively moist. And the price point on these is $16.98, which puts them right over that $15 mark. So they would be 50% off. So you would pay about $8.50 for these. What a great price. And they have 3, which would be awesome, because a lot of times when you plant things like this, you want to plant them in drifts, right? Odd numbers. So either 1, 3, 5, and so forth. And this is a really pretty variety. So you would just trim off all of these dry pieces, keep it in the shade, watered, good to go. And I found even another container of this lemon thread false cypress, and this one is even smaller at just about a gallon for $13.98, which would make it really easy to plant. And again, these grow pretty quick, so you could certainly start with a smaller one. And look what I just found, a tiger eyes sumac. I've had people ask me about these before, whether or not I saw them at the box store, and I actually hadn't until right now. This is a cut leaf staghorn sumac, and these have really beautiful chartreuse green foliage, but they really shine in the fall with their golden fall color. Look at that. So pretty. So it's a showy plant, can be used as an accent or in mass plantings. It likes full sun. It has yellow, orange, scarlet in fall coloring. Medium water needs. It is hardy in zones 4 through 8, and it gets to be 6 by 6 in height and in width. It says it is drought tolerant, and that is usually once established, and deer resistant. And these are by First Editions, and they are 2-gallon for $27.98. And some little giant arborvitae. Now what's cool about these is that they grow in kind of a rounded or globe shape. So unlike boxwood that you would need to trim to keep that shape, if you wanted an evergreen with that same type of shape in the garden, this would be a good option. It likes full sun, and arborvitae in general like a good amount of water until they are established. So they're very thirsty plants. And these are $13.98 for a 1-gallon. And in terms of size, they get to be 4 by 4. and they grow in a round shape, hardy down to a zone 3 or negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Because these are part of that giant line, they are more deer resistant than some other varieties of arborvitae. And I have a friend who grows these in her garden, and she does deal with deer and says that they do not seem bothered by them, which is a great thing. Well, that brings us to the end of the June inventory here at Lowe's. I hope that you've enjoyed checking out what my store has in stock, and I hope that you can find some of these varieties near you. Here's what I'm picking up today: 2 of these ladies' mantles that I found on clearance to add to my garden. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up button, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my future videos, and we'll see you soon.